Some people don't destroy themselves because they hate the world. They do it because they think it's the only way the world can finally heal. And that's what makes Lelouch Lamperouge so difficult to forget. Not because he was brilliant. Not because he won. Not even because he sacrificed himself. But because deep down, most people understand the feeling of becoming the villain in someone else's story just to protect the people they love. And that's not what Code Geass is really about. On the surface, it's a story about rebellion, strategy, power, and revenge. But underneath all of that, it's about a young man trying to carry a world that was already broken long before he touched it. A world that taught him one brutal lesson early: if nobody is willing to become responsible for the pain, then the pain never ends. Lelouch begins the story angry at the empire that destroyed his family and took away his sister's future. But anger alone doesn't explain him. A lot of characters in anime want revenge. Very few are willing to erase themselves completely to achieve it. That difference matters. Because from the very beginning, Lelouch isn't chasing domination. He's chasing control over suffering. And those are not the same thing. One of the first major moments that reveals this is when he receives the Geass. Literally, it's a supernatural power that lets him command absolute obedience. At face value, it feels like a fantasy. The ultimate weapon. The ability to force reality into alignment with your will. But psychologically, the scene communicates something much darker. Lelouch has spent his entire life powerless. Powerless to protect his mother. Powerless to protect Nunnally. Powerless to stop corrupt systems. Powerless to matter. And suddenly, the universe gives him a way to never feel helpless again. Most people have experienced some version of this. Not supernatural power, obviously. But the emotional temptation behind it. The moment where control starts feeling safer than vulnerability. When you've been hurt enough, control can start to feel like morality. Like responsibility. Like survival. That's why Lelouch's descent feels believable. Because it doesn't begin with cruelty. It begins with fear. And the terrifying part is how intelligent he is. Most villains in fiction lose themselves emotionally. Lelouch loses himself rationally. Every decision makes sense in isolation. Manipulate this person to save thousands. Destroy this system to create peace. Sacrifice one relationship to protect millions. Individually, each choice feels defensible. But that's the psychological trap of utilitarian thinking. When human beings become numbers, morality becomes arithmetic. And there's a scene that quietly captures this transformation better than almost any speech in the series. The moment he accidentally commands Euphemia to massacre civilians. Literally, it's a tragic misuse of his power. A catastrophic mistake. At face value, the scene feels shocking because of the sudden violence. But emotionally, that's not why it devastates people. What actually hurts is that this is the exact moment Lelouch realizes intentions no longer matter. He didn't mean for it to happen. He loved Euphemia. For one brief moment, peace was genuinely possible. And then his own power destroys it. Not because he was evil. Because he had already started believing he could control consequences. That's the illusion the story dismantles. Human beings can control actions. Not outcomes. And a lot of people spend years learning this the hard way. You try to protect someone and accidentally hurt them. You say the wrong thing at the worst moment. You make one impulsive decision that permanently changes how somebody sees you. The painful part is realizing good intentions don't erase damage. But the story becomes even more psychologically interesting after this. Because from that point onward, Lelouch stops trying to remain innocent. Before Euphemia, Lelouch still believed he could win and remain morally intact. After Euphemia, he understands something horrifying: if the world is going to become peaceful, someone has to absorb humanity's hatred. And he volunteers himself for the role. Not because he enjoys evil. Because he believes suffering needs a destination. That idea becomes the emotional foundation of the Zero Requiem. There's a scene near the end where Lelouch sits alone as emperor. And despite technically achieving everything he once wanted, he looks emptier than ever. Because the series understands something many stories ignore, victory without emotional connection feels almost indistinguishable from isolation. Lelouch finally controls the world. And he has never been more alone inside it. A lot of people unknowingly build their lives this way. They sacrifice relationships for achievement. Suppress vulnerability to appear strong. Convince themselves they'll reconnect with people after they succeed. But emotional exile has momentum. The longer you live behind masks, the harder it becomes to remember who you were underneath them. That's why Lelouch's double identity is psychologically important. Zero is not just a disguise. It's compartmentalization. The version of himself capable of carrying unbearable decisions. And many people do this in real life. Not with masks. But with personalities. One version for work. One for family. One for survival. One that quietly absorbs pain so the others can function. The difficult part is admitting the mask eventually starts consuming the person beneath it. And then comes the ending. Still one of the most emotionally complicated endings in anime. Literally, Lelouch orchestrates his own death publicly so the world can unite against him and move forward peacefully. At face value, it's a grand sacrifice. A redemption. But psychologically, it's something even sadder. Lelouch does not believe he deserves to exist in the peaceful world he created. He doesn't simply choose death as strategy. He accepts it as punishment. Because guilt changes how people imagine their future. After enough regret, some people stop asking, "How can I be happy?" and start asking, "How can I make my suffering useful?" That shift is devastating. And recognizable. Lelouch sacrificed everything not for glory, revenge, or peace alone, but because somewhere along the way, he decided the world needed a monster more than it needed another wounded human being. And maybe the real lesson of Lelouch Lamperouge is that sacrificing yourself for the world sounds noble, until you realize the world